Ladies and gentlemen, hello, welcome back to Overwatch League 2022 Countdown. I'm your host, Jake Helios, and we finally made it through 18 teams, and we're on to the last two, and I've saved arguably probably my favorite two for last. I mean, I don't know if you could see the glaring obvious jerseys behind me. This one. I'm gassed. I'm really gassed to be talking about it. So, today we're going to be talking about the Philadelphia Fusion and the Los Angeles Gladiators. Man, these are two very differing rosters in comparison to last year. Well, Fusion especially. Gladiators have made a few changes. These are two teams that you would usually expect to be going for the title, to be perfectly honest, especially Fusion, and that's exactly where we're going to start. Not even going to beat around the bush here. Let's go straight into Philly. I want to talk about them. I've got a lot to say. I'm not against this roster, not in the slightest. In fact, with Philadelphia this year, I'm really hoping that they can succeed and upset the pecking order in APAC. And there's a potential for them to be able to do that, what with all the emerging stories about Chengdu, the history that Hangzhou Spark have. They could do that. So let's start by taking a look at what they did in 2021. So 2021 expected to be sort of like, can Philly step up from their 2020 year where they were really close to winning an Overwatch League title? Honestly, they really fell apart in playoffs because otherwise they really should have been able to do it. However, they entered what I like to call visa hell this year, which was a shame for them, bless them. They essentially weren't playing with their full roster for most of the year. Like, they were without Poco, Funny Astro, EQO, and Shockwave for near enough 3 whole tournament cycles. Poco didn't even end up playing in the end. I know Funny Astro got some game time. When EQO got back into the roster, they were already looking much better. Shockwave, obviously, was fantastic when he came in. And a lot of those players have now since departed. They did bring in Hotbert and Toby last year to fill in those spots just off the cusp, and they did okay. They had a really good main melee stage, but unfortunately they were not able to get to Hawaii. Then they kind of fell apart a little bit. They did pick themselves back up again over the course of the season as some of their reinforcements came in, and they did manage to beat out Seoul in what was an insane rivalry over the course of the year to that, third playoff spot. However, it really didn't mean anything because they were battered out of the playoffs almost immediately by Gladiators and Shock. So that's 21, and I think that I do need to give some more context into that 2020 season because they were simply so good, and a lot of this roster that they had last year came over from their 2020 season, and they were just they were so good. I think when you're looking at Philadelphia, the narrative going in with this team is that they are a title contender. They should be. They were in the first grand finals. Okay, their 2019 season wasn't great, but their 2020 and their 2021... 2020 was fantastic. Against all odds, 2021 wasn't terrible. They really had to battle against some pretty horrible stuff last year in terms of the visas. So, the roster makes wholesale changes. Obviously, Alarm is no longer playing for this team, which is tragic in itself. Due to what we've already covered over here on this channel, rest his soul. And that's just an unfortunate shame, no matter what way you look at it. They let go of Hotber, they let go of EQO, they let go of Funny Astro, they let go of Poco, Rascal, Toby, Shockwave, and Mano, I believe, is headed off to go and do his military service. So, massive changes. That is near enough every single player from Fusion. This is a wholesale rebuild, apart from one dude. One Philadelphia player still remains. They still tuck themselves in, and they hold on for the rest of this stream. Who is it? Of course it's Carpe. Carpe's sticking around. Carpe is now the only Overwatch League player to have remained with their team since the inaugural season, which actually is really cool. And I have to say, I shout out to Carpe for some absolutely humongozoid loyalty to stick with Fusion there. Like, we love that. We absolutely love that. But he's joined alongside a couple new DPS talents coming up from T1. If you guys didn't know, T1 is basically Philadelphia Fusion's academy roster, which is why the organization was able to seamlessly essentially go over to APAC last year when it was demanded of them. So, this is a team that's basically in a full rebuild, but fortunately because of that academy, they can just pull prospects up. And who do they bring in? They bring in MN3 and Zest. Okay, so these are their two DPS talents that are joining alongside Carpe this year, and they came from T1. I can tell you this now. I've spent a lot of time watching some VODs of these two, and I'm just sticking on some stuff in the background from a game against Talon, where actually they played remarkably well when Talon were technically the second place team last season, but I think that T1 really were up there with them. It was essentially a top three with O2 Blast, who were far and away the top team, and then Talon and T1. And I have to say, the amount of stuff that I've witnessed from these two in the VODs that I've looked at, it makes me very, very excited. Now, I think APAC is an absolutely stacked division when it comes to DPS talent. I think that Profit and Fits on Soul are going to be disgusting. Let's pretend that Chengdu are able to potentially keep Leave, Jinmu, and Aprita. That's nutty. Hangzhou Spark with Alpha Yin Shy, it just looks incredible. And then obviously Shanghai Dragons are there up there, you know, as well. And to be fair to Guangzhou and LA Valiant as well, those DPS lines don't look terrible. You know, they're coming in to the league in a season where APAC is absolutely stacked for DPS talent. But in my opinion, I think these guys are up there. I really do. I've looked at a lot of accounts where they're saying MN3 and Zest maybe 4th, 5th best in this league, but I can potentially see these guys being able to take it by storm. I think that MN3 is an absolutely radical hit scan player. If you've been having a look at anything that Philadelphia have been posting on their socials for the last few months, it's just MN3 popping off. And the more that I've watched of Zest in this last day, so I've been spending the day watching a load of VODs of these guys. Oh God, Zest is good. My God, Zest is really, really good. I thought I was going to come in here and think MN3 was like the top prospect, but actually, I'm really swaying towards Zest. He is, I know we're watching Heesang right now, who again is another top prospect in Korean contenders, but Zest is incredible. Between these two guys and Carpe, Philadelphia basically covered every single base when it comes to the DPS. And that's amazing. That is honestly phenomenal. That's a lot more than some of the other teams can say. And I think that they've covered it in a way where they essentially have some talent that are ready to ascend to that top tier. From what I've read, from what I've heard, obviously I've listened to a lot of things from Tactical Crouch, from Platchat. A lot of the emphasis is on MN3, and I'm excited. I'm genuinely incredibly excited to see these two players play. I want to see them pop off, and God damn it, Fusion need it. And you know what? We're just I just need to show you what this guy can do. Like honestly. I am so impressed with Zest, and I wasn't even high on these players when I started watching them. Like I really wasn't. When Fusion announced them, I'm thinking, okay, you know, this is fine. But the more I've delved into it, the more I am just blown away. Like these guys are good. These guys are really, really good. I mean, look at him dunking on Proper there, who is, you know, if the Scrimbucks are to be believed, he's everything and more. So we'll simply have to see what he does. But yeah. Overall, DPS line, good. Is it an upgrade? I would say yes. I would say that Zest is probably better than EQO and Shockwave. At the very least, he is a really big talent to have coming in. And because he's so young and because it's his first season, once again, and I've been like a broken record when I've been talking about this over the course of these episodes, but I believe that when you're young and it's your first season, you really have something to prove, you know? You want to walk into this league and you want to be that next superstar, and I really think that Zest and MN3 are going to be able to provide that. I personally think that they both had the capability to bench Carpe. I actually don't know where Carpe now fits into the equation, because MN3 basically plays all of the hit scan that Carpe already can. And both MN3 and Zest can play Tracer to a pretty decent degree. I think that's maybe the one thing that I would sit here and say isn't, like, you know, overly covered by Fusion. I don't think that they have like an overall god tier Tracer player like your Lips and your Leaves of this world, but it's undoubtable to say that they cover everything, and I think that Carpe is going to have to really find a niche to jump into to be able to actually get himself in this roster. I think it's I think it's interesting. I really think it's interesting. But just take a look for a minute. Like, I'm gushing about this DPS line, and I've been doing it for so long, but I feel like I simply have to. They just look ridiculous. Like, they seriously look ridiculous. I mean, look at MN3 here, flexing over onto the Genji as well. Like, I mean, they basically have all the bases covered. At the moment, I'm likening them to an APAC version of Shock in the form of, like, you know, your Proper and Kilo, but instead it's MN3 and Zest. So Look, I got really high hopes for these guys. I think that they can be absolute superstars for the future. Right, but we can't sit here and gush about the DPS line all day. I am going to sit here and I am going to talk about the other roles, which notably are a little bit more vacant. There are a few more holes maybe that need to be patched, but obviously we're 2 weeks away now from the season. We're a week away, well, we're less than a week out from the beta. The beta's no, it's 2 weeks today that the season starts actually, and we're less than a week from the beta, which is absolutely insane. So I think that these are the 6 that Philly are probably going to be walking in with. And if that's the case, that's fine. I, you know, it is what it is. Let's talk about the tank. Let's talk about Fury. Okay, Fury is, in my opinion, one of the greatest tanks to ever touch the game. On London, he was instrumental in them bringing home that title against the Fusion, ironically. He has always had an incredibly high degree of mechanical skill and intelligence to know what to do on the off-tank role. I thought last year on Washington he wasn't so good, but I think that entire Washington roster and that coaching staff just didn't know what to do. That's for me an example of a team with all the money and no brains. It was just not it, Chief. And unfortunately, Fury didn't shine. So Fury gets the opportunity to come back to the Philadelphia Fusion, and he jumps on that. Personally, I would love to see Sado come back from Toronto to join him now. I think that if you get Sado and Fury back in here as your tank line, you're looking at, 2 players that can cover every single base. I mean, I wouldn't go too far out of my way to sit here and say that actually Fury probably has the skill to be able to play all of the tanks that are necessary of him. So unlike other rosters, maybe like New York, who only have Kellen, Vancouver, who only have False, I do feel really good with Fury just being the sole tank for Fusion. I think I'm more confident in Fury than I am in like Piggy and whatnot. It's, this is good, but I think that if you really, really wanted to just shore up those holes, you would put Sado in this roster. And he's a free agent. I see no reason why not. He obviously has a permit to work in Korea. He is a Korean national, so bring him in. Just simply bring him in. I do think that Fury could probably elevate this team again above where they were last year, and I think he could probably elevate them a little bit higher than maybe where people are predicting them to be. Like, I mean, when I look at Chengdu Hunters, who are above them and obviously potentially falling apart now due to reasons that are of the organization's making, I see Fury as a much better alternative to Gaga, even though obviously they have different hero pools. I just think that Fury is more mechanically gifted, and Gaga's good, man. I look at Hangzhou. I know that Hangzhou have Liga, Bernard, they've got Gouchwei, but again, I'd rather take Fury. Smurf is absolutely incredible, but again, Fury is just that malleable. I think you can put him into anything and he'll be fine. So again, maybe this is a way to get a little leg up on Seoul, and obviously Shanghai have all their bases covered. So again, this is good. This is excellent. Their DPS is stacked. Their tank roll is basically shored out, but put Sado in there just to be sure, or bring someone in. I mean, in T1, they have Velos Ray, who's playing for them at the moment, who has just turned 18 this year. I think, obviously, with it being their academy roster, you could bring Velos Ray in at a relative moment's notice, which will be good. Yep, there he is. He's still there. I also think that Celestin is pretty good actually as well. I think Celestin had a no, not Celestin, Clestin had a really, really good year actually on T1 last year. So yeah, it's good stuff. I'm confident. I'm quietly confident about the tank line. But, we'll see how we go. And now let's move on to the supports. So once again, what happened to Alarm is genuinely tragic. And this team would obviously much rather be in a position where they still have him. But unfortunately, the way of the world, we don't have him with us anymore. So they plug the hole with Aim God. Now, I remember a few months ago, obviously, when the news broke out about this and when they actually signed Aim God, I remember thinking to myself, why have they picked up Aim God when there are so many other flex supports on the market? But what I'm assuming is that a lot of their flex supports had been snapped up by teams, but just not announced. So at the time that Aim God was announced, New York still hadn't announced Gangnam Jin. They still hadn't announced Myeongbong. I don't think Vigilante had been announced to Washington, but obviously Vigilante, doesn't turn of age for another few months yet, so you can't play him. So they turn to Aim God, which is interesting. Aimguard has always been a player with a high mechanical skill ceiling, in my opinion. I think that he had some pretty high moments on Boston, and I think that actually on Washington, when he was obviously paired with the right players, when Decay comes in on the Zarya and they make their immense playoff run, I think that Aimguard was actually was pretty good in that. I think that mechanically he was doing exactly what he needed to be doing. I think that, you know, he could let the tanks really run the show, and he was just able to sit there and do what he does best, pump out heals, pump out a bit of damage, you know, and chuck in a nano boost where he needed to on the Ana. But I don't think he has anywhere near the flexibility and the high ceiling on every single flex support that obviously Alarm had. He has been on Team CEC in this last year, who didn't have a particularly good year this year, but he has still remained competitive and he does know what's happening within the league. So it's nice to have somebody in there that's got a little bit of experience. He obviously did have quite a lot of troughs in his time in the Overwatch League, so this is a player that, you know, had high highs and pretty low lows, you know, and I think the inconsistency is pretty dangerous in this league. So you got to hope that on, you know, in his time in Contenders, he's been able to iron out some of those inconsistencies and, you know, maybe change his style of gameplay so that he's not inting too much and not relying solely on the mechanics, going for, you know, really weird flanks, and that the guy can actually, you know, perform at the highest level that's needed of him, because he's got really, really big boots to fill here. Personally, I don't think there's any flex support in the league that can fill the boots that Alarm has left. So, you know, I think this is serviceable, but if you're Fusion and you're an APAC and this is a region that has really, really stepped its game up, I don't think serviceable is good enough. But we simply have to see. Obviously, Fusion had a different plan. You can't blame them for this pickup. This was a necessity. This is something they had to do. And of everyone to pick up, I don't think that AimGod is the worst option. I don't think he's a bad option either. I just think that obviously the level is so high right now that it's difficult. Although there might be some, you know, some Chinese flex supports on the market, maybe Far Away or Monk ends up on the market at this point. Like, we'll have to talk about Chengdu when it happens. You know, if it happens. Like, I personally hope that Chengdu does manage to sort it out, but it's not looking like it from the rumblings. Okay, so the last player that they bring in is Fixer. I have spent a lot of time looking at Fixer as well. I think I mentioned it on some of my my earlier VODs, or like some of the other teams I've been talking about. I think I was talking about it when I was looking at Boston potentially, because he comes from Uprising Academy. He comes from the Academy team. And this is obviously a dual purpose used VOD here for me, because it's also got Reiner, and Reiner I will be talking about later for the boys in purple. But I was really impressed by Fixer. I've watched a fair few VODs of this guy. I know you just saw him get absolutely mopped the floor with there, but Fixer is a Korean player, played on Uprising Academy last year, who were out and out probably one of the better players, the better teams in North American Contenders. I think he's got a pretty decent Lucio on him. I don't think it's his best role. I think his best role is his Brigitte. And if you guys have watched my 5v5 sort of like my VOD review of Shock versus O2 Blast, I think the Brigitte is still going to be vitally important going into Overwatch 2 if her kit stays the same, or if the state of the game is anything like the workshop mode. So I have to say, I am excited for Fixer, and I think having a good Brigitte player on your team is going to be vital. I love that the gameplay I've shown you is him getting mopped the floor with. Like, wow. Let's take it back a little bit so I could try to show you something where he's playing well, because believe me, I really do think that this guy's got a high skill ceiling, especially on that sim. And the Lucio's not bad. And in a game where mobility is obviously king, you know, and it can be king, and it's instrumental to rush, and obviously with your dive compositions as well, I think it's important to have someone that can play the Lucio, much more than I think it's important to have the double flex support anymore. So I like Fixer. I haven't seen a lot of his Mercy, so I can't really comment on that, but I like this pickup. I like this pickup a lot, and I think that he will round out the roster to a degree that's pretty good. Again, I love I've picked out the gameplay that hasn't got much going on in terms of what Fixer can do. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go and grab Fixer's highlight package from Fusion. Hello. And we'll go and take a look at that. because I think that's probably a better representation of what the kid can do. You know, again, pretty impressed. I have been pretty impressed so far. And as I say, I'm really, really, I'm on this bandwagon right now of thinking that Brigitte is going to be, you know, vitally important in the league. So good pickup. So while we're watching this, let's talk about Fusion as a whole then. Where do we think they're going to sit in APAC? Obviously, you know, there's a lot of teams in APAC that have covered all of their bases. You know, Hangzhou have covered all of their bases. Shanghai have got all their bases covered. Currently, you could say that that Chengdu are basically covered for everything, bar, you know, maybe having an off tank to shore up that role. Again, look, some decent Lucio player coming out from this guy. Like it's important. It's important to have a guy that can play Lucio on the team. I personally, I've been thinking early already about how in every single season you have teams that are going to overperform expectation and underperform. And last year, Fusion definitely underperformed expectation, and to an extent, no fault of their own. Obviously, I mean, Hopper and Toby aren't bad replacements, but to no fault of their own, they didn't have the full roster that they were intending to work with. And I think that Fusion actually this year could potentially overperform. Even though APAC has some absolutely ridiculous talent in it, some of those teams aren't going to work. Let's say, for instance, that Hangzhou fall apart again, which is highly possible due to, you know, their coaching, and I'm not sold on their coaching. And let's say that obviously Chengdu maybe lose a lot of their players due to their financial instability at the moment. Then you could potentially see Fusion going up a couple of levels. You know, that takes them nearly up to third in APAC, which is vitally important to be getting into the mid-season tournaments. You know, they need to be hitting that top 4 as much as they physically can. And for a lot of the season, that's going to be a battle against Hangzhou, in my opinion, but I do think that they can do it. I think that this team has enough sheer DPS talent and some really good versatility on tank and some potential on support that would probably allow them to do it. Couple that with a couple of maybe mid-season pickups from different teams or maybe from their own contenders unit, and they might be able to squeeze themselves into playoffs at the end of the season. I think that if you're a Fusion fan, you need to tailor your expectations. I think that you need to expect this to be a bit more of a rough season, but I personally think this team is talented enough to go and do it. I'm also a fan of the coaching, and I didn't mention that, and I do want to bring that up before I move on. I think that their coaching staff is really good. So Jin has been working on Talon for the last year, and again, sees Talon through to a 4th, 3rd this year, where T1. He's been working on T1. And he saw them to a 3rd, 4th, you know, against teams like O2 Blast, against teams like Talon Esports. So, you know, he's combated against some of the best that there is to offer, especially on their roster-wise, over in Korean contenders. And I think that he's done really good. So I have no qualms here. I think this guy is excellent. He was also a part of the Guangzhou Charge roster that got to the Summer Showdown finals in 2020 season and beat the Shanghai Dragons. So that in itself is excellent. I know they've lost 9K, but I don't really think 9K worked out in this team as well as people wanted. He's also brought with him a couple of other coaches. Sung Min is one of them, but I want to focus on Chara. Chara, much like Jin, has come over from T1, but he was also a player on Guangzhou in that 2020 season. So you've got a couple of coaches here that have come from some line of success. They know what success is, you know. They've had some time to work with each other. They've obviously picked up players from the team that they were coaching initially. So hopefully you already have some pre-existing synergy going into this team. So I'm pretty high on Fusion, and there's not a lot of people that will be as high on Fusion as I am, but I am cautiously optimistic that this team can still have a good season, despite the fact that they probably haven't got the roster that they would actually want to have going into it immediately. So we'll see how they go. Obviously, you'll see where I rank them next week. I'm going to be doing an NA and APAC, and I'm going to be doing a meshed version. So we'll see how we go. But I thoroughly think that this team will be okay. I think that this is a team that will excel, and the rest of them will fall away. Okay. That's Philly. So we've talked about Philadelphia. Now we move on to the last, and certainly not least team in my book. I have been waiting a grand total of 2 months to talk about this team. Let's talk about my boys. Let's talk about LA. And I am going to be, interestingly enough to a lot of you, you guys might all think that I'm going to sit here and I'm going to gas up this team. I'm actually not. I have a lot of questions, and I think that obviously as a Gladiators fan, I followed this team for a very, very long time, and I think there's a lot more things that I notice and a lot more things that concern me that maybe other people might not clock onto immediately. So let's talk about Gladiators in 2021. In fact, I'm going to give you a full narrative of this team basically. 2018. 2018, top 6, they get to playoffs, they get knocked out by London. The Great Bamboozle was a thing. They had a relatively low-tier roster in comparison to other teams and still managed to do great things. David Dipe was the coach in that time and has been up until 2022. 2019, obviously, is GOATs. They did okay. I think they finished 5th in the regular season behind Hangzhou and New York and Vancouver and Shock. They did fine. They were okay. That was one of the seasons where they spent big and managed to get Decay and things didn't really go too well for them. If anything, that was the first year where they really underperformed with the roster that they had. Moving on to 2020. 2020 was a low spot to be a Gladiators fan. That was a wholesale change in your roster. You bring in Birdring, you let go of Shawfall. You brought in Space. You've let go of Void and Bishu. They're finally gone. Obviously, Fisher's no longer playing for you. He wasn't playing in 2019. You bring in OG, thinking that OG is going to have a good season. There's some really decent talent on that team, and unfortunately, Gladiators were not able to hang. They did manage to make playoffs, but they really got shut down quite quickly. I can't remember who we lost to in playoffs now. I remember us beating Toronto to get further in, but I think we lost to Mayhem. So it wasn't a good season, 2020 for Gladiators, but 2021. So that was the time where they started incredibly slow. They took a loss to Shock. They took a loss to Dallas in the main melee. It took them a little bit of time to get themselves online, but they bring in some great talent. They get in, obviously, Kevster's still with them. They bring in Muse. They bring in Shu and Skewed. They get in, words. Hello, Jake. Turn the page. They have some really, really good talent on that team, and they do manage to pick it up midway through the season. They end up finishing 2nd in North America. I think they ended up finishing 4th overall behind Chengdu, Shanghai, and Dallas, and they made it to the Countdown Cup, so they only got to 1 Hawaii, but they make it to the Countdown Cup, they make it count, and they actually win themselves a stage title. And anyone that saw the Countdown Cup, it was sick. They were really, really sick. Yes, I believe that some people take credibility away from the Countdown Cup because Dallas and Shanghai were burnt out and were basically underperformed in their respective regions and weren't able to make it. But I think that either way you look at it, Gladiators were probably the best team that's in that cup, in that tournament. They deserve to win it. That is a little bit of bias, but I don't care. So what do they do this year? The narrative coming in is that they finally have a little bit more of a peak, and that this roster is really coming together. Well, this year they let go of some really instrumental pieces, but they also bring in some big, big names, man. Like, this roster looks stacked on paper. So who goes? Moth goes, Muse goes, Mirror goes, and Birdring retires. I think that losing Birdring is absolutely massive, and not in a good way. I think that Birdring was one of the most consistent hit scan players that has existed in Overwatch. And I believe that it's going to be very, very difficult to fill his shoes. Obviously, Moth didn't get as much playtime because Skewed really, really did dominate on the Brigitte, and Brigitte was a heavy influence last season. But Moth is a big loss when you're looking for Lucio players. I thought Muse had a good year last year. I've looked at a lot of accounts and a lot of people have said that Muse wasn't good last year, but I think that Muse was the kind of piece in Gladiators whereby his job was to just coordinate with the DPS, with your off tank, and just make sure that the system worked. And for the most part, that did. He did have a good Wrecking Ball. He didn't have a great Reinhardt. His Winston was pretty good. I genuinely was quite sad to see Muse go. I thought the Muse did fine, and I thought that keeping him would have still been fine. However, moving into Overwatch 2, you can understand that maybe those insecurities around Muse's own personal hero pool might have been a problem, especially if he's not able to win an off-tank anymore. So, maybe the right decision. Still sad to see it happen. And Mirror also goes, and unfortunately Mirror really just wasn't the player that people expected him to be when he came in, so it's a shame. He had some decent moments, but he's gone. Who do they bring in? Right, they bring in Reiner, Funny Astro, Patty Pan, Arns. Bring in Arns. Alright. Where do I even start here? Because I need to talk about the coaching as well. And I know I did a stream a little while back about DK leaving Gladiators, but there's so much to talk about here. Let's start with the tank line. I need to start with the tank line. So, Space remains. That's good. Space has been consistently the best Western off-tank for a number of years now. I thought that last year he was absolutely excellent. I really did. I think he deserved his spot on Roll Stars. I don't think he's a harm bin or a void at this current point, but Space he does just keep getting better. And I think that he really does devote himself to the scene, and I think that he deserves his spot. And I think that having him on your roster going into this season is really, really excellent for this team. They bring in Reiner to join alongside him. Now, if we jump back somewhere over here, oh, guys, just been set down. If we jump a little bit further back over here, back to whereby I had to change what you guys were seeing on screen because of simply how nasty the team was. Reiner's looking pretty good. Reiner do be looking pretty good. So this was the main tank from Redbird Esports, formerly American Tornado. He has gone by quite a few names. Obviously, he renamed himself after Attack on Titan, which I absolutely fucking adore. But the guy has got a really prolific Reinhardt on him. Unlike a lot of other Western main tanks, this is the truth about Western main tanks. The fact of the matter is that they don't really have an affinity for Winston most of the time. Dive heroes. Reiner has proven over the course of his Contenders career that he can play the dive tanks, which is rare for a Western main tank, which is excellent. Will it hold up to your traditional Korean main tanks playing Winston? I don't know. Probably not, but his versatility and mechanical skill is the one thing that I think that you're buying into for Gladiators. Overwatch 2, you go down to one tank. You need someone that can play everything. This guy has even showcased in history that he can flex over into some of the off-tank roles. So for Gladiators to pick this up, a very high-rated prospect, bring them in. That really does shore up any holes that you could possibly have in that tank line. So, Reiner, good pickup. Really good pickup. Very happy with it. With Space, this is good. The support line. The support line for Gladiators is pretty simple. They keep Shu and Skewed good. That was an instrumental core to their success last year. They were really, really excellent. Skewed's Brig is the best in the league. Fight me on it. Li Jaegon is obviously up there with him, but Skewed was an absolute... He was essentially a sleeper pickup, and he really, really did perform. The guy can flex over pretty competently onto the flex support roles as well. He's got a decent Zen. He's got a decent BAP. I guess he can play the Ana, but obviously you're going to be wanting Shu to play those roles. It's a cracked backline, especially when you sub out Moth for Funny Astro. Funny Astro is a better Lucio than Moth. More aggressive, you know? Probably a little bit mechanically better as well, but it's that kind of play style that I think Gladiators are looking to play. They've always been this team that likes to be hyper-aggressive and really play fast into the opposition. I think Funny Astro really does enable them to do that. Again, I think you're losing a better Mercy. I think Moth was easily the better Mercy, and you're losing that. But I think in these kind of seasons, you do need to have an excellent Lucio player, especially when speed is going to be king from the rumblings I'm hearing this season. But the other thing is that the guy's got a decent Brig on him. Now, Moth by no means had a bad Brig, but I watched Funny Astro's Brig last season, and I did think it was excellent. Him and Alarm were able to seamlessly swap through that role if they needed to, which was really, really good. And bringing that onto Gladiators is probably going to be excellent, because you know that if you have a map where you want to play Brig, but you could potentially have to lean into Lucio, I think you're more happier to run with Funny Astro than you were with Moth. So that's the backline for Gladiators. Surefire, excellent, really good. So far, so good. Now, the questions come in for me, coaching, and with DPS. DPS, let's talk about DPS first. They keep Kevster. They keep Kevster for not just this year, but next year as well. Good. Simply put, good. Kevster was an absolute nutcase last year. He was ridiculously good. His Tracer was, in my opinion, towards the top of the, the top of the league. I really, 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 really liked Kevster. I think he's an absolute hyperflex player, and keeping him is really important. So, who do they add in with Kevster? Bring in Arns and Pattypan. So here's a little bit of history about these two players, right? I can show you some stuff, right? So we all know Arns, and if you don't know Arns, this is Arns. Arns joined the league in 2020. He was picked up by Shock from the ladder, and this guy is just an absolutely ridiculously good Widowmaker player. This guy's Widowmaker is on another level. Like, I mean, seriously, this guy is without a doubt the best Widowmaker that has graced this planet. He is incredible. It's scary. So last year, though, however, so from 2020 to 2021, he actually left Shock at the end of a season where basically he was getting I don't know what the statistic is off the top of my head, but he was essentially getting the first kill in team fights like 60% of the time, which was just leading to team fight wins. He's just ridiculously good. And having that on your team is good. He left last year then to go and play Valorant, and then ended up coming back to Shock midway through the season after Striker retired. When he came back in 2021, look, the guy was still fine, but he wasn't the 2020 player that we had. He wasn't the player that in 2020, God, I'm losing my head. He wasn't the player that in 2020 lit up the league and was able to essentially dominate team fights off of his back. Like, he was genuinely incredible in 2020. And his 2021 self didn't mirror that so much. So, I think that if obviously he can peak, and I think that if he can get back to the level that he was in 2020, and I think that if he can perform at the level we all know he can, I think that Arns is a suitable replacement for Birdring. If he's going to be consistent, I think he really, really is a suitable replacement. But there are so many questions, in my opinion, surrounding his consistency, especially after watching him this season, that I do worry a little bit about this pickup. And it's why, personally, I would like to have the known quantity in Birdring rather than someone that can have an exceeded ceiling than Birdring, but, has shown moments of not really being able to be with it. Arns also spoke publicly about how the 2020 season had a mental toll on him, which is part of the reason why he decided to quit Overwatch. So, obviously Birdring has had that too, but you would hope that Gladiators is an environment whereby he can excel like it was for Birdring, where he kind of shored himself up a little bit there. That's maybe one of the factors in my head that is a positive for Arns. Like, this is an environment whereby he should be fine. And he should be able to sort of like overcome some of those issues that he has. But simply, he is an unknown quantity. It's mighty important. So, that's Arns. Arns is incredible. I love the pickup, but I have questions about it. The other pickup is Patapan. So, I'm going to let this roll, and I've watched this video about 20 times, okay? He's ridiculous. The kid is cracked. So a little history on Patapan, for those that don't know. The guy was 14-ish when Overwatch came around. He's from Thailand. He was a sensation in that one World Cup year. He's a hyperflex player, a true hyperflex player. He can play everything. And he was a highly, highly sought after commodity. However, because he couldn't play in the Overwatch League until now, where he's only just turned 18, he essentially decided to skip out on Overwatch and go over to Valorant. Now, I watched him play in Valorant. I can't remember who he was playing for. I think it's X10. Well, they used to be called X10, but I watched him in Champions last year, and this guy was ridiculous at Valorant. Obviously, Valorant is a different game, but his raw mechanical skill is nothing to scoff at. And he's now coming back to Overwatch, to the Los Angeles Gladiators, and is trying to shore out this DPS line. Look, the thing with that Patapan that I know everyone is questioning is the fact that we haven't seen this kid play on a professional stage in a few years now. Obviously, Valorant is a different game, and it's different to watching a contenders like a Korean contenders player like Proper coming up into the league, because you have simply watched them the year before, playing at the top level. Like, that is the way that it is with Korean contenders. Whereas this guy has been off the scene for a little bit, and we don't really quite know if he's still got it. So I think a lot of the worry with Gladiators is that if these two perform, you have a DPS line with the highest skill ceiling in the league, possibly. Like, you have two players with an immensely high skill ceiling coming in here, that which rivals your top tier DPS in the league, like your Profits, your Fletters, your Lips, etc., your Pelicans of the world. Like, they're great. They're incredible. But they are unknown in the sense that we don't know whether they're going to perform in the same way that they have in the past. Like, you don't have enough evidence on that. I mean, and obviously, I personally am a little bit more worried about Arns than I am about Patapan. I think Patapan's going to be fine. But I do worry a teeny bit about Arns because of the way he performed last year and whether 2020 was potentially, like a bit of a fluky year. Like, you simply just don't know. And that's, mind the fucking gap. You simply don't know. And that's where I think a lot of people get a little bit worried about LA because, you've got one player that is going to be absolutely fine. But you have two unknown quantities. But I think it's safe to say that if these guys both pop off, or at least one of them pops off, you've got a team that's looking at championship. This team should be looking at the championship. I would love to hope they go for the championship, but I simply don't know, and so I'm not quite sure yet. The other thing to talk about is coaching. Now, okay, hold on. Let's just do the throw rule. We do need to talk about the coaching staff. I absolutely adore David Pay. I love DPay. I think that DPay is one of the primary reasons why I became a fan of this team and not, a European team like where I'm from. When I was watching Gladiators back from when I was still in university in 2018, I loved the Great Bamboozle. I loved the aggressive style of this team. I loved the way that they play tactically was so different to other teams. It was exciting and enjoyable to watch. And, credit to DPay. DPay is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful creative coach in that regard. And losing him for the first time, and this is the first time this team is having a head coach change in 4 years. They were the only team that kept their head coach for 4 years. And that says something about the organization that he's essentially built. So he's gone now. Who comes in instead? So Face basically gets promoted from assistant coach to head coach. He's been with the team since 2019, back into 2019, going into 2020. So he's learned a lot. They've talked openly about the way in which they've communed together, DPay and Face, and I think that they had a really good partnership. So I firmly believe that Face is going to be able to step into this role, but there are questions about it. Like, it's a step up. It's a big step up. Fortunately, there's a lot of backroom staff coming in to help him do this, okay? First of all, I'm going to focus on Unter. Unter is the bane of my existence because of Atlanta Reign. I am scarred for life by the amount of times that Atlanta Reign knocked Gladiators out. They knocked them out Summer Showdown. They knocked us out of playoffs. They just kept getting the better of us until we managed to go in and pip them when it came to the Countdown Cup, where we absolutely demolished them. Who didn't they have? They didn't have Pelican that year. So basically, Unter was a big part in Atlanta's success, and I love the fact that he's jumping ship over here. I think that he's going to be an excellent assistant coach, and this is Team Australia now. There we go. You're welcome, everyone. I'm happy with that. The other person that comes across is Smash. Smash, much like I've already mentioned with Philadelphia, is an O2 Blast big brain. This guy was on O2 Blast last year for both Season 1 and Season 2 of Korean Contenders, and really helped develop this team into the, behemoth that they became. So I'm very confident in having a brain like this coming into to the organization, just to really help pushing forward and to help make sure that the Gladiators can perform at the highest level. So you lose DPay, you also lose Ty Dolla. Ty Dolla goes over to Washington, and I thought Ty Dolla was good, but you've got two really, really excellent assistant coaches and one head coach that's already very familiar with the organization and the way that it works, especially in the last 2 years. I don't think that this coaching staff will step away drastically from the way that Gladiators have been. I would really, really like to believe that they will stick to sort of a similar way that DPay has run this team. And I have to say, I do have a little bit of an optimistic outlook on this as well, in the sense that DPay was also, much like Arns, much like Burbring, has been very open with health over the last few years. I believe that in sport, when you have a captain, when you have a coach, when you have a manager, somebody that is, sort of the figurehead within your team, the leader, you look to them for leadership. And I think that with many teams over, many different sports, if your coach or your leader, is showing signs of flaking, or if they, maybe exude, a different mentality, that does rub off on your players. And obviously DPay did an exceptional job in managing his. But I do think that there could have been times, and this is just me speculating. This is me radically speculating. There could have possibly been times whereby, if he's not happy with something that's happened, it rubs off on the team, Gladiators have been notorious every single season for having a slow start. Last year is a primary example of that. Started incredibly slow, and it did it ended up costing us opportunities in time to develop as a team. There were also times where Gladiators dropped the ball, we lost to Atlanta in the playoffs, and we really shouldn't have. You know, we played an excellent series against Shanghai, and really, we were better than we could have been. Like, we could have been much better in that series. So, I'm not saying I'm attributing all of that to DP. I'm just saying that maybe with a fresh sense of leadership, somebody that's maybe a little bit more sure of themselves, that's confident and whatnot, that rubs off on your players, and you end up getting a much more solid organization. It could be a boon. It could be a little bit more of a detriment. We simply don't know. And I think that's why at the moment, when people look at the LA Gladiators, they sit there and they think, top 5 overall, you know, top tier overall, but they're still willing to put them behind Dallas, potentially Atlanta, Shanghai, obviously, maybe Chengdu, obviously, if they were to stay together. I've seen people put them behind Shock as well. And I understand. To be perfectly honest, I completely understand. And I can see where the reservations will come from. But I think if I'm to summarize this team and their aspirations, they should be gunning for a championship. I think that they have the highest skill ceiling potential in the league, bar Shanghai. I think they have a much higher skill ceiling than Shock and Dallas. I really, really do. And I'm really, really hoping and praying that they just have an excellent season again. I think if you're Gladiators, you have to qualify for every single tournament, and I think that you need to be coming away with something again. You know, at minimum, you have to be coming away with something again. I don't think it's acceptable for Gladiators to come away and not win something again this year. That being said, I think that there is a lot of high caliber teams in this league, but with the roster they've got, they simply have to perform. And I really, really hope they do, honestly. But even if they don't, I'll be behind them. Because that's what you do when you're a fan. Okay, that's what you do when you have literally put your lifeblood into getting all the merch, man. I love this team, and I will never stop loving this team. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the last team that we had to go through for the team previews. I have to say, 20 teams later, I've had a bloody brilliant time doing this, and I'm terrified of next week, because next week we're going to be doing a tier list. So I'm going to be sat here slaving away, shitting myself, just trying to put these teams from 20 to 1, you know? And I've thought about it already. I've been thinking about it for a while, but I don't know, fam. I simply don't know. So we're going to find out. I'm going to do an NA tier list, I'm going to do an APAC tier list, and then I'm going to do a culmination of all 20 of them, because I'm absolutely mad. I could be here for 40 minutes. I could be here for 5 hours. I simply don't know. But yeah, we're finished. Hopefully we get access to the Overwatch 2 beta and we can go and have a look at more of that footage. But for now, that's the end of the team previews. Thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And that's the end of this one. So we'll see you next week for the tier list. Goodbye, everyone.